Hello, this is Mike Nichols, the content and social media manager for AEM. Today, I've got Zoe Fyfe and Bill England joining me to talk about scaling a wildfire intelligence hub. We couldn't ask for two better experts to talk about this particular subject. Both Zoe and Bill come to AEM by way of our FTS brand, and each one of them has years upon years of experience in environmental monitoring for wildfire. Bill currently oversees all of our customer relationships in the North American public sector. And Zoe, she oversees product development for the AEM sensor portfolio. So Bill, Zoe, welcome.
Thanks for having us, Mike.
Thank you for being here. And why don't we just get down to it? So I'm guessing the concept of a wildfire intelligence hub might be new to some of our audience. Zoe, maybe you could kind of start us off, make sure we're all on the same page, maybe explain exactly what a wildfire intelligence hub is.
Yeah, sure. That would be a great idea. All right. So conceptually, a wildfire intelligence hub could be thought of as, a single digestible source of information, right? Where it's all coming together into one location. And it's used to support emergency responders and others before, during, and after events. For instance, you'd have like a natural disaster, a wildfire, flood, that sort of idea. In reality, because that's, like I said, that's more conceptual. In reality, you could imagine this actually being more of a centralized software platform. And what we're looking for is that this platform delivers information that is high quality, meaning that the data is vetted. It's something that you can trust, that the information that's being brought in and provided through this platform is relevant to the situation at hand, and that it's also timely, so that you actually have the data up to date or up to the date of what you require for your use case. And then also the other piece of it, what makes it an intelligent hub, is that it also provides you a means of customizing and automating the responses to the information that is ingested into the system. So for instance, a user could set notifications to let them know if or when a fire risk is especially high, or when there's lightning storms that are entering their territory and striking near high risk areas, so they can respond appropriately.
Great. That's a great baseline definition, Zoe. Thank you. If we were to dig maybe just a little bit deeper, what are some of the organizations or types of personnel that might potentially have use for a wildfire intelligence hub?
I guess to answer the question fully, we want to think about what it is that we're protecting with this intelligence hub. And that can be broken down into kind of three categories: lives, human, animal, and the like, property or assets, and then business continuity. So if you take it in that context, you can quickly envision the sorts of organizations that would benefit from a wildfire intelligence hub. Let's focus first on lives, right? So human and animal lives. Municipalities would leverage this information to dispatch local emergency services and determine if evacuation is required based on the situation. Farmers would use this for the same purposes. And then you'd have primary industries such as forestry or mining, oil and gas. They would also be concerned about worker safety. And so they would be constantly evaluating where, when, and if work can be completed in the areas that might experience high risk of wildfire.
And if I could add to that a little bit, so I think a lot of us, when we think about sort of property protection, you picture your house, or your car, favorite restaurant that you might live in, or that you might frequent. But when you're designing a solution to protect against wildfires, you kind of have to broaden the scope. And that's where we get into the concept that some people might have heard of the wilderness urban interface, or the urban interface, the wildland interface. And that's the geographic area where our communities butt up against sort of the wilderness. And I actually live here outside of town in sort of the wilderness urban interface myself. And so when you're thinking about humans sort of encroaching more and more into some of the wilderness areas up the mountains, closer to the sort of beautiful landscapes that we enjoy here in North America and around the world, you have to really think about that. And then you got to add in the fact that there could be dams, there could be other sort of water reservoirs, different other natural and natural features that, while it's a beautiful area, also introduces some risk to that community, to those lives as well. And so on top of that, you also have power lines, you can have railways and roads. And so you need to start thinking about exit plans if there were scenarios where there was an event of any kind. An earthquake here is topical. I'm out on the West Coast, so sometimes if you have an earthquake, that's a common scenario. Could be a fire burning across an area. So those are the sorts of things that you need to think of, and the best way to protect those assets and those people fit in that sort of plan in the urban interface, where there are often fewer roads, fewer exit options, etc. And so you need to coordinate with local, federal, state, or provincial organizations, as well as private organizations, and they need to share that information and the monitoring sources together. Additionally, when I talked about power, one of the things is business continuity that quickly comes to mind in those urban interfaces, where you might have power lines coming through a mountain pass to that remote area. So if that gets cut off, how are they going to communicate? So all those things become heightened in a wildfire event, and also, flooding, earthquakes, etc. So those are all parts of the things that we need to think about when we're thinking about property and lives.
That's great. It sounds like a good wildfire information hub has to be capable of doing a whole lot of different things. Which kind of just raises the question for me. So exactly what kind of intelligence or information does it need to serve up in order to accomplish all of those different jobs?
Mike, I think sort of intelligence is the key here. So when you think of the amount of environmental data that's being collected on a massive scale, like think in your car, there are hundreds of sensors, and they're gathering data from inside and outside and across, all these devices all over communities, all over the highways. There's weather data all over the place, a monumental sort of scale of weather data. The information hub's primary role is to ingest all that useful data. So you want to get as much useful data in there as you can. You monitor for relevant change, and then you take actions such as notifying humans or notifying other edge devices to maybe sample more often, for example, because certain conditions have triggered. So best way to talk about this is probably through an example. So I'm going to use air quality, popular topic today, fits in well with wildfire when you've got a lot of smoke. There are more than 10,000 sensors measuring PM 2.5 today. So that's particulate matter today in the US. These sensors, there's a variety of scientific grade sensors, really high-end $100,000 plus sensors. There could be temporary ones, and then you've kind of got your value price point. I have one here, the Davis Airlink at my house, just to sort of monitor that. So there's a variety of different sensors, and it records PM 2.5 over time on intervals or continuously. So an organization can ingest that in, and you need to customize that to your needs. So if I'm a school, what do I care about? What are my needs? My needs are, can I send the kids outside today for recess? Is that safe for them to run around? Or is it too smoky to send them outside? Or what are the different conditions? So those notifications that we'd be worried about would be sending notifications to school staff that the air quality was too poor. The AQI, the air quality index, was too high for children to be outdoors. Would be an example that kind of roosts with me.
Yeah, and I think that if you take that and you expand on it, and you think about how that information could apply to other stakeholders or other organizations in the area, you could then have that same set of information being utilized by a municipality, but they might be more interested in where the particulate matter values are increasing specifically, because it might indicate that there's a wildfire nearby. So not only are they interested in the PM value, but the PM value along with the GPS coordinates, because then they can send out someone to investigate. And if you were to go even a step further than that, and you were to think of that same value, that particulate matter value being measured, and you were to incorporate that with like our national forests or the Forest Service, then they might want that measurement along with GPS coordinates, and then they would have it automatically being fed to, say, cameras, that they have at lookout towers, and that those towers could then be, the cameras could be moved around into that location to see, is there a wildfire? Do we need to respond? Do we need to send a team out there and action off of it? And all of that comes off of just one measurement value. And that's why that intelligence piece is so important, because now you start bringing in rainfall or current traffic conditions, your list of holidays, right? Because it'll depend how we react, whether a municipality, a school, a forest service. Again, it'll depend on if it's a weekend, if it's a holiday day, if it's the middle of the week. All of that information together requires a sophisticated decision-making engine so that you can action on that in a timely manner. And I guess, like, as a final piece to it, that to really play to this is that if you were to, for instance, tie in that particulate matter value that you're measuring, but I'll overlay it with the prescribed burn dates that are known, then along with locations, then even though you might get a warning of the PM value having increased, because you know that it also is a prescribed burn date, you don't have to overreact. You can say, oh, we know what that is, we'll go check and confirm. But now we don't have to all of a sudden grab everyone and make and I guess include all the emergency responders to go after it, because we already understand where those values are coming from.
Well, I'm just going to say, between the two of you, I mean, my mind's kind of blown. I mean, that's a lot of information we're talking about, right? Both whether we're talking primary data being collected or secondary data from processing the primary data, or different combinations of that it's just a lot we're talking about. So if we're talking, for the benefit of our audience, if they're thinking about what they might need in their environment, for their environmental information needs, and their own intelligence hubs, what should they be thinking about, right? Let me phrase that differently. What are some of the key items they might want to think about when they're evaluating their own needs?
I would say that, first of all, it's the geography plays a huge role, right? Are you in a city? Are you in that wilderness urban interface? Like, what happens in that case? And that also then plays into the problem you're trying to solve. Is this about notifying individuals that there is a potential for a wildfire? Like, what is the action or that you're expecting or hoping to get out of the information that you're collecting? So that's going to help you determine the type of data that you require and how best it can be obtained. But when you're thinking about those pieces, you also want to reference them back to what I mentioned earlier, which is around data quality, relevance, and timeliness of that data. Because in there, that helps you to figure out what kind of instruments do we need, right? Bill mentioned earlier about air quality alone and how you can have scientific grades or a more value cost type of sensor. The same is true for any data that you want to collect. So, for instance, if you need incredibly high accurate sensors, then you're going to look to, say, the National Weather Service that actually posts their standards for instrument measurement. And that's required if the data that is being collected needs to be fed into the National Weather Service. So data quality is very important when you're thinking about what sensors do we require, what values are we trying to do, and what level of accuracy are we going to need to make our decisions. Relevance, again, very important. If the problem we're trying to solve at the time is how do we mitigate a wildfire that's currently out, well, we're not going to worry about our pollen count, right? The fact that our pollen count all of a sudden has gone super high, and we have that data in the system because maybe we're using it for another situation or another problem to be solved. You don't want alarms going off or people being notified high pollen count, because that's just going to offset what we're really focusing on, which is we have a fire, we need to mitigate that fire. So relevance is super important. What we care about there is we're going to care about wind speed and wind direction, right? We're going to care about where, like, the location of it to determine what roads might be near the area. And then, of course, timeliness is very important. I mentioned earlier about oil and gas and forestry services. If you're trying to calculate the fire danger rating, that's something where you require a set of data once a day. So there's a certain time of day, the data has to come in at that day, it has to be a full set of data, and then you can calculate your fire danger rating. But once again, if you're trying to mitigate a fire, you're going to want data updates every 5 minutes, every 1 minute maybe, right? Because we all know how wind speed and wind direction can change so quickly. So all of that is so important in making decisions about where should your weather stations be, or where should that data be coming from? How frequently do you want the data? Other really important factors to take into account are, first of all, privacy. So if the data is potentially like a camera, if it's taking pictures, where do we need to block out some of the images or some of the pixels in that image? But privacy is always very important, especially if you have a public portal or you're collecting information. Security is also so important. It's a big piece of our decision making today, especially when we have a software platform, is how secure is it? You want to make sure that the data that's being collected, that you can trust it, that all of a sudden your cameras aren't going to be controlled by some external force you're not aware of, and it turns it away and you can no longer use the assets that you have. And then accessibility is really important. If you've got multiple stakeholders across different organizations, community scientists, as well as the Forest Service, as well as municipality, you want to make sure that you have access. Everyone's got the proper access to be able to get to that intelligence hub and take advantage of the data that's there.
So Zoe, Bill, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. It sounds like you're talking. It sounds like there's a basic process that people need to work through to figure out what kind of information they're going to need, what kinds of equipment they're going to need to collect it. But even if they zeroed in on what equipment they need, I'm guessing there's a pretty big difference between, say, the needs of a 1 million acre national forest and a 50-acre community park. So once they zero in on those general needs, how do they go about assessing how much equipment they actually need or scale those needs?
That's a good question, Mike, and it certainly can scale from a small community park all the way up to the massive national forest, or even at a nationwide sort of scale, or statewide as well. And it all really comes back to what Zoe talked about with that needs analysis, where you look at sort of the organizational or the agency requirements, what the risk profile is, and then you start getting into the topography, the local partners, the stakeholders, to determine what you have out there today and what you need to have all the information available to monitor things, and then understand any gaps that you might have as a result of that. So you go back to your needs analysis, you understand kind of the current landscape, the desired landscape, and then you start looking and working with other stakeholders. You open the lines of communication if they're not already open, talk about what information they have, and that also helps you figure out how you can scale it up, because there might be a lot of information already out there and you just need to unblock it with some reciprocal sharing agreements. I'm thinking in terms of utilities or different state. Every state has a wildfire program. All the towns will have certain amounts of data. We talked about tens of thousands of air quality sensors. Those data sources are incredibly useful when you put it into an intelligent hub that can sort of cipher through some of this information. So you've got, could be a citizen scientist that has really useful weather data on their barn, or the county, town, state, federal utilities, forestry, etc. So, but go back to the grassroots, understand your needs, build it up from there, and you can scale it all the way up to nationwide, or keep it at just your local community level with the smaller sort of data set and requirements.
Perfect. Thank you, Bill. So let's suppose that I've actually figured out what my needs are. I've gone through the needs analysis. I figured out, okay, I'm going to need these pieces of equipment, and this is how much I'm going to need. But now I'm facing budgetary constraints. So how does somebody go about building that buy-in with their stakeholders through either whether it's their organization or their community?
Good, another good question. So you start with this upfront analysis. You get your needs of the data that's currently available, and through that process, you're stack ranking your highest priority items, your greatest risk, be it in terms of life or assets, etc., depending on what your organization or agency cares about. So you're going to have your highest priorities, and you put that in place, and you can put a plan together over 3 to 5 years. Obviously, you're going to start with your highest priority items, and you work your way down from there. Also, when you coordinate with other cooperators, there can perhaps be, you have shared risk. Maybe you can have shared budgets. So maybe some of the local utility or the local town, you can be some matching. We have a lot of clients today. There's a lot of funding sources available out there right now from the infrastructure bill and other sources, the usual grant sources that can help scale up the money that you might have available. So, but it all starts and all goes back to sort of needs analysis. What do we need? What are our priority areas? And then you go out and you search around for funding sources to extend what dollars you do have available.
And if I can add in there, I think that, that customization piece as well is so important in your intelligent hub, because if there are concerns, say, around budgetary constraints, then we realize that all of this data that's being brought in, all this information that's accessible, by just altering what, who is alerted and what they're alerted on, you can have multiple stakeholders getting the information that they need, when they need it, to whom they need it, at whatever time they need it, but it can all be coming out of the same system. So now you're leveraging the same platform with all the same data that's being collected, but you're able to customize it to whichever those needs are. So in this case, I may be getting ahead of myself, but if you have a wildfire for intelligence hub and it's collecting all of this weather information, it could then potentially even be morphed into being used in some other capacity at some other time of the year when wildfire maybe isn't the high risk that we're so concerned about. So go on. Yeah.
Sorry, Zoe, I was just building on what you said there. We have a lot of our customers, obviously, our RAWS equipment is high altitude. And we have a lot of, it's a great spot to gather weather. In the summer, there's fire danger risk there when fires rip through the mountains. But in the winter, you can be doing avalanche monitoring or snowpack melt, which obviously results in flooding, weeks, days, hours later as it flows down the mountain, etc. So those sort of shared budgets, the data can be forked to multiple people and the notifications and alerts as a result of that. And so you can stretch those budget dollars a lot further. That's exactly what I was talking about. So thanks for making that point for me.
I, for one, this has been really helpful, Zoe, Bill. Thank you. I feel like I've got a much better sense of what a good, effective wildfire intelligence hub might look like, or at least how to go about identifying what your particular intelligence hub should look like. Hopefully, our audience does too. Do either or both of you, would you like to leave the audience with any final thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess to play it all back, realize that the problems that you're facing are ones that others have faced before. And so being able to leverage what others have done and how they've built out their systems is where we can help as well, because we've done this before. And more than that, it also is recognition that wherever you're situated, whatever your constituency is that you're caring for, whether it's students in a school or way larger in a massive city, you have more stakeholders in play and other data sets and resources that you can rely on and feed in to make your wildfire intelligence hub stronger, more far-reaching, and just that much more useful to you, so that you can proactively make intelligent, actionable decisions and help protect those lives and those assets, those work continuity that we're so concerned about in our daily lives.
And from my perspective, Mike, and I certainly echo everything Zoe said there. I hate to sound like a broken record, but you got to go back to that sort of needs analysis and working with your stakeholders. I think those are the two key things. If you have some risk, there's a lot of good information out there, but it starts with grounding yourself in what do we need to accomplish? What do we have today? Who can we cooperate with to kind of put something together to protect our sort of mutual interests? And so I always kind of go back to that, understand your problem, understand your needs, understand who you can work with to solve that problem.
All right. Well, Zoe, Bill, again, thank you so much. This has been a great discussion. I really appreciate you taking time to share your thoughts, your perspective on this very important issues. Until next time, this is Mike Nichols.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.